thank you. And thank you again for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to be here. I've really enjoyed sitting in and listening to the conversations. You guys are so lucky. I wish I had this module when I was at uni or something similar. But today I'm going to talk a little bit about decolonizing drama school training and the UK theatre industry in general. Um, so a little bit about me and why I conducted this research. Before I did my master's, I went to drama school. I was, and I am still a musical theatre performer, um, but I experienced a lot of racism and microaggressions, and I felt that the drama school was a very microaggressive environment. Um, and the more and more I had conversations with other people of color that were in the industry and went to drama school, similar sort of themes emerged around our conversations. Um, and also, I went to drama school during COVID, so there was this kind of pre and post COVID area where things started to feel a little bit different. So during lockdown, when the Black Lives Matter movement was sort of re-sparked, there was a movement of students and drama school students that were speaking up on social media about their experiences with racism, and kind of exposing the institutions for things that have happened. And for the first time, these institutions and like these big decision makers and producers were actually listening, and there were some changes that were happening, and I was like, oh, this is really cool, really interesting. I wonder if these changes will actually last, one, and I wonder how deep they go. Are they surface level, or are things actually changing within these institutions? And the systems that perpetuate this racism is something happening to shift the gears there. And that's why I conducted this research. So I've done two bits of research, one during my bachelor's, which looked at um, uh, the impact of BLM on the UK theatre industry in general. And my master's dissertation was about students as stakeholders, and it looked particularly at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, which is a really big drama school. And how students were able to influence the institution's social marketing, and DEI as an outcome of that. And the findings from that research are being used to aid a school that I'm working with in decolonizing their curriculum and their DEIB strategy. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, before I tell you a little bit more about, give you some more context and tell you a bit more about my research, I wanted to share this quote. This quote, when I found it, for me, it really kind of highlighted why I think representation is so important. So it's, we want and deserve to see people like us represented truthfully and fairly. We want and deserve to see people like us succeed in the arts and in other realms. And we need to see people who are not like us in those same ways, so that we can better understand each other and live together in a multiracial and multicultural society. Um, so these numbers come from a report and a study that The Stage did. The Stage is a UK theatre media outlet, and it looked at 19 shows in the West End, and was looking at how many performers of color they had in their shows. And amongst those 19 shows, 13 of them were people of color specific shows. So they're shows like The Lion King and Hamilton that the whole point of them is that you have a person, people of color in the cast. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. So 18% of those 13, oh, sorry, 18% across the 13 shows that weren't people of color specific, 18% of those performers were people of color. And including the people of color specific shows, the overall percentage was 38%. And in comparison to the London population, that actually doesn't look too bad, but it doesn't take into consideration there's actually like 40 shows on the West End, as well as regional theatres, um, and off West End shows and semi-professional productions. So while like at face value these numbers don't look that bad, the reality is probably a lot worse. And something that I found really interesting was that the people of color that were in these shows, twice as many of them were ensemble members than rather than lead roles. So so it just sort of begs the question about how are they really being represented? Are they even really being represented? And this is just more data from that same report that compares the ethnicity of people in the West End musicals versus the UK population. And you can kind of see like the most represented ethnicities are white and black. And I think that's one of the issues with the UK theatre industry is they only care to appear inclusive and representative at face value, because we have so many other ethnicities that need to be represented. And I think representation of people that are mixed race is also quite important. But they didn't even have a section to include mixed race people in the study. So yeah, and looking at the data that's come from drama schools, this was a report that was commissioned by Andrew Lloyd Webber, who's a very famous musical theatre composer. He did shows, he composed shows like The Phantom of the Opera and Cats. And what I find really ironic is he's very outspoken on the lack of diversity in the industry, but his shows are some of the least diverse out there. Um, so it's interesting. But he commissioned this report. It's called Center Stage, and he commissioned it in 2016 and 2021. Um, but again, the report only looks at 20 schools that are part of the Federation of Drama Schools. Um, and the Federation of Drama Schools are the most funded. They have the highest standard of training. Um, but you can see that there's been quite a lot of positive initiatives there. So 64% of schools have enhanced their outreach programs. 60% of schools have diversified their management and academic roles. 76% of schools have partnered with community organizations and waived audition fees for underrepresented groups, which is huge because like the fee to audition for one drama school is usually like £50. So if you can imagine you're applying to all of them, or like you're applying to five of them, that it adds up really quickly. And a lot of the time you're applying and you're paying £50 to go into a room, sing, I don't know, 32 bars of a song and then get rejected and you don't get your money back, which is absurd. So it's another barrier for people that come from lower socioeconomic status. But yeah, so there's all these great positive initiatives, but again, this is only looking at 20 schools that are the most funded and the top of the top. And the reality is there's 120 schools in the UK that offer vocational drama school or like drama school style training. And what I mean by vocational training is that they focus on just technique and very practical elements. So they don't have very academic modules that have like 8 a.m. ballet, 8 a.m. ballet, or jazz or singing or acting through song, but they won't have they'll if it's a degree program, they might have like a dissertation or some sort of project, but majority of the time they don't have anything that's academic in these courses. So these are some quotes that came from some students that I spoke to in the interviews for my master's research. Um, and I interviewed 10 people for my master's research, and what was really sort of sad and disheartening was everyone that I interviewed had something to say that was like this. Um, so I can explain a little bit. So song The Color Purple is a musical. And it's also it's a musical that comes from the book The Color Purple. It's a very, very beautiful story. It's a black story. And there's I know specifically what this person was referring to because I see it a lot happening, but there's a song in The Color Purple that was popularized by Cynthia Erivo. I'm sure you guys have heard of Cynthia Erivo, the Elphaba and Wicked. But there's a song, it's called I'm Here. And it's basically her talking about it's basically her singing about her letting um go of like all the oppression that she's faced in her life, so the racism, the abuse, um and it's a very challenging song to sing, so it's very impressive, and a lot of people um sing it in singing lessons for technique purposes because it accesses a particular part of your voice that's challenging to access. But some people, I think, take the piss a little bit, and it's in the past, a lot of white people have performed it, and institutions have allowed that. In fact, I even think my school did it after the BLM movement as well, in a showcase, where they had a white girl sing this song. Um, but it's a whole thing where people will pick material and it's not necessarily appropriate, and then having to try to explain why it's inappropriate feels like an argument, or feels like you're fighting a losing battle, and it very much feels like, oh, the racism police, because you're explaining why you're uncomfortable with, or why someone shouldn't be doing, it's not appropriate for someone to be doing a piece of material, but constantly having to justify it. So yeah, these are some of the recommendations that have come out of the research that I did for my master's in terms of what decolonizing the curriculum looks like, or might look like at a drama school. Um, these recommendations are kind of like still at first stages, and there's a lot of them, so I won't go into detail about all of them, but I'll pick a few out that I'll go into some detail about. So the first one being critically examining the curriculum for biases and stereotypes. I'm of the opinion that the whole drama school system needs to be looked at and restructured and changed, because there's so many biases and stereotypes, and then so many things wrong with that system, but and not even just at a racial level. But yeah, the biases and the stereotypes are really embedded into the system. And I feel as though the industry has evolved more than the training system. It's been sort of slowing down. The rate that the industry was evolving at has definitely slowed down since the BLM movement has lost its momentum. But I don't think they're sort of at the same level at all, especially because from my own lived experiences of entering the industry versus going from training, where they make you feel that the industry is this horrible, big, bad place, and everyone's very cutthroat and no one likes each other, and which is not the case at all. But looking at the existing curriculum and looking for the biases and the stereotypes is one of the first things that came out. And kind of in the same realm of that is unconscious bias training for faculty and staff and students, but especially faculty. One of the things about how drama schools operate is a lot of the faculty that teach, say if it's like dance, for example, ballet, jazz, and different types of dance, they're not there on a full-time basis, they're there on a freelance basis, and they're actually like industry professionals that they're performers, they're not teachers. So they have been trained in that drama school system and have taken their biases from that into the industry and then bring it back into the classroom. Um, and so it's really important to address that, because unconscious bias is unconscious, but having a sort of awareness that it's something that exists is like can make a lot of changes in the way that people approach things, and also some sort of having some sort of educational training or educational background, I think would also help with that. But that's one of the problems, is that a lot of the people that teach at these institutions aren't qualified teachers, they're performers. And exploring the historical and social and political context around the performing arts, yeah, that's something that we never really looked into. So a lot of people don't know a lot about musical theater history. And one of the things is they call pre-1965 musicals the golden age of musical theater, because it had lots of very talented composers. But what some people don't realize is the majority of that period was segregated, and especially in the States, people of color weren't allowed to perform. So it's critical, I think, to be able to explore that historical, social, and political context around the performing arts, because also so many different types of music and dance are at their core forms of resistance, and have come out of political situations or power imbalances. Then another thing that has come up is creating space for open dialogue, and this is one that a lot of institutions have tried to do, but I think haven't done very effectively, because they don't listen, they don't actively listen, and they don't hold space for uncomfortable truths. And so if we're talking about a situation, for example, like cultural appropriation of material, they become very defensive about it. They don't let themselves sit in the uncomfortability, and they don't take accountability for things going wrong. And then one of the most prominent themes that has come out of my research is co-creation with students. Students really, really want to be a part of the solution. They really want the institution to change things around, and they have a lot to say and they have a lot to contribute. But I don't think those institutions hold their suggestions with as high value as they should. But in general, when I've been looking at what's come out of my research, it's that decolonizing the curriculum isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process of learning and unlearning and relearning. But the most difficult part to do is to start, and to look and to sort of do an internal audit of the curriculum, and to get things going. But I think curriculum and the curriculum is dynamic. It needs to be constantly changing and evolving, and that's no different with when you're talking about decolonizing the curriculum. And then just to sort of wrap up, the remaining challenges around the industry is that there's very limited research on the West End shows and the smaller shows and regional theatres and other kinds of theatre, as well as the remaining drama schools and colleges that are offering vocational training. So it's quite difficult to get a picture of how diverse things actually are, and how much things have actually evolved. And even though there is research, it's so small in the grand scheme of things that I don't think it's an actual realistic picture of what's happening, and I just don't think the numbers are that accurate in the grand scheme of things. And there's still an underrepresentation of people of color in leadership and production positions. And there's very few to no initiatives to address that. And I'm a strong believer in for to start seeing tangible changes in these area, you need people with lived experiences leading the way. Um, and I think that once we start getting more people of color in leadership and production positions, we'll start to see some of these changes unraveling. And then there's continued underrepresentation of people of color, actors and students. It's a lot better, but it's still not quite there yet. And that's because it's continuously difficult for us to break into the industry compared to our white peers, because, you know, we have to put up with things like them not having the right color foundation, or not knowing how to do your hair, or stupid things. They're not stupid, but they're silly and impactful things that really wear a person down after a while. And if I sat here and told you about all the things that happened, and I was only at drama school for 2 years. Like, I did 2 years, and then I went into the industry, and I got my agent, and I started working, and then I went back and finished my bachelor's at a non-drama school institution. But I only did 2 years, and like, we'd be sat here until tomorrow if I told you everything that went on. Um, but amongst all that, like, the biggest takeaway from my research, and the thing that I need to continue to remind myself whilst doing work that's like this, is that positive changes and uncomfortable truths can exist simultaneously. So whilst there's still a lot going on that's not great, it's a whole lot better than it was, say, 10 years ago. And there are constantly things happening. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's people like us that will make those change, continue to make those changes.